Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serve Pro. Fun show on tap for us. Jake Fromm back in his customary spot of Tuesday today. Connor Riley stops by. Also, great stuff last night from New Orleans, the event known as Super Bowl opening night. Our Cody Chafin's on hand for that. That means you get a front row seat for all that, too. Of course, the next few days, we're going to showcase some of conversations with former Dogs playing the Super Bowl. This is a really great way to kind of lead into the big game and what is our final football game of the 2024 season coming up on Sunday. So that's really fun. I'm excited about that. Let me take a moment to say hello to you, and then we'll get ready to rock and roll with the show here today, covering a bunch of ground. In addition to the Super Bowl stuff, there's also, I think, a very interesting thing coming from ESPN that I do think gives some clarity about who some of Georgia's most important players are going to be for 2025. And in the couple of names we're going to mention, these are for really very different reasons. We'll get to that here coming up in just a moment. So good stuff on the way with that. Let's see. Here we go. Now let's dive in here and get a couple of comments. And then we'll see what's on everybody's mind and get ready to do some fun stuff here today. UJ Marine also kind of pointing out, the big story in sports this week has been the Luka Doncic trade, which, on the one hand, I don't really follow the NBA much anymore, but on the other hand, you can't help but be somewhat interested in this. And I guess what Marine was pointing out is something I guess I'd also, sort of paid attention to too, which is, not getting a chance to sign that, what they call the Supermax contract. And obviously the difference between living in Texas, no state income tax compared to California, which has literally all the taxes. Financially, this is a little bit of a hit for Luka. I mean, he'll still sign a new contract and he'll still make big money. But I've heard, one of the initial estimates, I think this is overstating things, I heard it might cost him as much as like 9 figures. Garrison Tucker says early Braves prediction. Garrison, to be honest with you right now, I don't have a ton of optimism for Atlanta kind of shakes out. Now, the one thing that you would believe is they're still going to have some of the best starting pitching, certainly in their, kind of, other than like, say, L.A., maybe Philly, the Braves starting pitching still going to be, I think, pretty good. But you kind of wonder, okay, when does Acuna come back? What does he look like when he does? This is probably the least, I don't want to say enthusiasm, because I'll be excited for the season, but optimism maybe in terms of kind of how it ends for Atlanta. It is a pretty murky picture here right now. I do not have a ton of that. A West GA Dog fan, I will try to check my email. I like I said, I'm sorry. I don't mean I'm the worst email person in the world. And even the people that work with me will tell you that I am not a great email person oftentimes. But West GA, I will take a look at that. Thank you very much for your kindness. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you very much. West GA Dog fan, one of our great commenters in our comment section on a regular basis. Doghouse Lawn Care, great to see him in here. I feel like we hadn't seen Doghouse Lawn Care in a little while, but I'm glad he's here today. Good stuff there. Baruch Dog also shouting out the Georgia basketball team. Yeah, obviously important week for Georgia basketball. You got winnable games here after a really tough stretch against very good teams. And for the most part, I guess maybe with the exception of Arkansas, the teams that are beating Georgia are among the best in the country. So there's a little bit of a caveat for that, but this is the schedule you've been dealt. You have to play them, and you got to find a way to beat somebody. That's one of the reasons why I think for a lot of Georgia fans, the Arkansas game the other day was really, that's the one that I think most people would say was the most disappointing for them. The fact that, Georgia in that spot, you're on the road, but nonetheless, a team that only won once in conference, or I guess that, had only won once in conference. That was its first conference win. Arkansas's first conference win. Now they've beaten Kentucky too, but that was the one you really had to play well, and you kind of didn't. As I said yesterday, just not putting the ball in the hoop right now. And so this week you got to see some improvement with that. Hopefully you'll be able to. Randy Hall wants to keep seeing Georgia get those IMG players after obviously Georgia won a commitment there today. So yeah, that's awesome. Thomas T-Bone 86 also excited about Taco Tuesday, so that is a lot of fun. Richard D says, when does spring practice start? When does Kirby have interviews again? Well, the next Kirby interview almost certainly will be to kick off spring practice, which is usually like the middle of March. Georgia likes to begin its spring practice after spring break for the college is done. So we're usually kicking off, March 15th, 16th, 17th, something like that, and then kind of rolling through G-Day, which is going to be, I think this year it's Master Saturday again, in kind of, that particular spot. So midpoint in March is usually when spring practice begins, and that's when we'll hear from Kirby Smart addressing some of these issues that Georgia fans have been wondering about. All right, time to get the show rocking and rolling. Let's fire up the animation. We will tell you all about it. Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We are so happy that you're here. What a show it's going to be. Jake Fromm later on. Some interesting topics to address with him about what Georgia's going to look like for this upcoming season and some of maybe the top pass-catching targets. We'll kind of get into some of that with Jake Fromm here in just a bit. Connor Riley also stops by, too. Connor, interesting story at DawgNation.com. We'll kind of dive into, kind of related to the same sort of thing here about how Georgia gets an upgrade when it comes to just better play from the wide receiver position. That plus a little bit of a look at the Super Bowl. That is coming up with Connor Riley today. And speaking of that, what a night last night for Dawg Nation. Our Cody Chafin's on hand for what the event is known as Super Bowl opening night in New Orleans. Boy, we're going to have a moment here just to celebrate what is, I just think, a strong UGA presence at the biggest football game of them all. And honestly, sometimes the story is just sort of as good as it feels like it is, and I think this is one of those cases. So we'll do some great stuff with that, and we'll also look at a couple of players from Georgia already getting some buzz from ESPN for the 2025 season. That is on the way, too. So a lot to do today. We are so happy to be able to do it with you, and most importantly, we're glad that you're here. So let's get it rolling. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, coming up in a couple of minutes, we're going to get to current Georgia Bulldogs players. ESPN has a really interesting story out right now, kind of projecting some, as they call them, way too early All-Americans. And there's a handful of Georgia players that get mentioned in this particular story. And I do think that gives us a pretty good perspective as to who some of Georgia's most important players are going to be for the 2025 season. This is an interesting conversation. We'll do it here coming up. Also, Jake Fromm, Connor Riley with us today. So two great guests. But let me begin with this. And if you don't mind, let me be slightly self-serving just for a moment. There are occasionally moments in our sort of time here at Dawg Nation where I'm, pretty proud. I like the size and scope that we're able to cover Georgia football with. I love seeing strong presence from us when it comes to events like the Sugar Bowl, College Football Playoff. I love the way in which we get to be able to bring coverage of Georgia to you on so many different platforms, whether traditional stories at DawgNation.com, our show here, DawgNation Daily, going on 10 years strong, being able to do this for you, some of the stuff that you get from our social media accounts like Instagram, things like that. I just love the size and scope that Dawg Nation's able to put on display on a regular basis. And I thought that last night for us was an example of that. This is Super Bowl week, biggest game of them all, final football game of the year. And when the Georgia presence is as significant as it is, I think one of the things you want to be able to do is be able to reflect that here on Dawg Nation. So our Cody Chaffins was there last night, and over the course of the next few days for our show leading up to the big game on Sunday, and what a perfect way there is to be able to do this, over the course of the next few days, we're going to be able to bring you a lot of kind of first-person perspective, exclusive interviews, intimate moments with some of the former Georgia players who are in New Orleans for the big game. And a lot of that's going to be on this show. If you want to kind of get this in addition to what we'll do for you on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro, all of our social accounts, certainly Instagram, our own YouTube page. There's going to be a lot of that stuff. And I got to tell you, I spent a good bit of time late last night, early this morning, kind of diving through some of what we've already heard from the, as they're known, Philly Dogs, or a guy like Malik Herring playing for the Kansas City Chiefs, and I thought it was really good. And look, anytime you get a chance to talk to somebody about such a big game or hear them reflect back on their time at Georgia, there's, of course, there's going to be some value to that no matter what. But what I really found interesting about some of the guys that Cody was able to talk to yesterday is how, I guess, personal all this felt for them, and how willing to reflect on their football journeys some of these guys were. Because, we obviously see, facing a TV screen or like a small little dot. If you're watching the stadium, sometimes the players feel very far away, way down there on the field. And I think because we either see them through a screen or see them, a long way away, much smaller than real life when you're in the stands, I think we have a way of sometimes making it seem like these football players, because they are larger than life, their faces are covered in the helmets. We have a chance, sometimes we think we have a temptation to forget that these are like real people living their real lives. And, this is about, making friends and personal ambitions and all that kind of stuff. That's what their football careers are. We sort of think about it as, are you helping my team win or lose? But for them, there's a lot more going on with this than that. And I couldn't help but kind of pay attention to that as I was watching some of these interviews that came out of Super Bowl opening night last night. I want to start with something from Keely Ringo here. And I just think this is such a nice thing. Ringo kind of talking about what it feels like to come from Arizona. You get to the University of Georgia. You make friends with all these guys who themselves were from different parts of the country. And lo and behold, so many of those guys now reunited with the Philadelphia Eagles, as kind of known as the Philly Dogs. And so many of those former college teammates now working together to make a huge impact here in the NFL with a team that has a chance to pull an upset and win a Super Bowl on Sunday. Keely Ringo, I think, really good at reflecting on just how meaningful all of that is for him. This is awesome from Ringo. Take a listen to this.
It's a blessing, honestly, man. You could tell us 4 years ago when I was an underclassman and JD and them were upperclassmen. If you told us we were going to be on the same team and playing for a Super Bowl within 4 years, we all say you're crazy, man. But man, that just goes to show, man, how blessed we are and highly favored we are just to be able to just be in this situation. I walk in this building, I'm like, dang, I'm really living young Keely's dreams, man. It's just a great feeling just to be able to soak it in.
I mean, I know I'm kind of sentimental, and so stuff like that probably works on me in a way that maybe doesn't work on all of you. But I got to tell you, man, that really works on me. It's like, man, young Keely Ringo, to look around and see, 4 years ago from where we started, now we're all here together, have a chance to win a Super Bowl. Like, what a great life and what a great story these guys are continuing to tell. And we're not going to be done this week when it comes to hearing some stuff from Keely Ringo, because I thought he had plenty of great things to say ahead of this Super Bowl and kind of reflecting back on his time at Georgia. It was all, really well done by our guy Cody Chaffins. But I just really love that. And I think one of the things that I keep kind of coming back to when it relates to all these, especially when the Eagles, because there are so many former Dogs playing for Philadelphia, what I keep kind of coming back to in my mind is this story really is as good as it seems to be? Because y'all know, I mean, someone like me sort of speaks into a microphone and, we would be tempted to sort of hype stuff up no matter what. But this really doesn't require a lot of extra hype. This doesn't require a lot of embellishment. Like, this really is as remarkable a story in reality as it appears to be on paper. And one of the things that makes it so amazing, and we have certainly chronicled this over the years, is that all of this, the presence of these Dogs in Philadelphia, the impact they're having on the Eagles defense in particular, all of this was done on purpose. This wasn't, by accident. You look around, you're like, oh, gosh, look at that. We got a handful of Georgia players here for Philadelphia. No, we've played the clips for you before of the GM of the Eagles, Howie Roseman, saying that when you've got a program like Georgia that has won so much, why wouldn't you want to use that program? Roseman has called it sort of a one-stop shop, where you can draft guys like Jordan Davis or Keely Ringo or Nakobe Dean, who's obviously injured right now, Nolan Smith. You can go out and acquire a guy like Lewis Seen through free agency. You can get a guy like Jalen Carter, making him really among the kind of the centerpiece of your defense, maybe even right now. You can do all of these things because you trust the program that was helping develop these players for that next level. And if you're a Georgia fan and you take a lot of sense of pride in that, I think you have good reason for doing so. And if all of that makes you want to root for Philly against, the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday and all of the pageantry they have associated with them, if your team is the Eagles on Sunday in this big game, well, as a Georgia fan, it's easy to understand why you might feel that way because of the way these NFC champs showcase the best of what Georgia's all about. And with that in mind, one of the things that Cody last night had a chance to ask so many of these players that played at Georgia for Kirby Smart, now in the NFL, is to kind of take some time to reflect on what Kirby Smart meant to them. And this is an amazing, we're going to kind of put this together as a package and just sort of play this for you together. And I'll sort of tell you, if you're listening audio, you don't see the faces. I'll kind of tell you, who some of these guys are. But the one thing that you get in hearing these players talk about Kirby Smart is the interesting contrast of, man, this guy got all over me, but I knew that he loved me. And a lot of us have some experience with coaching in some way. And the best coaches that we've ever either had, or the way in which, if you are a coach, you try to hopefully, be as a coach of, hey, I'm going to have a high standard. I'm going to hold my guys to that high standard. I'm going to push them to be their best. But I better make sure they know I love them while I'm doing that. That's what I think a lot of us would say, good coaching is, great coaching is. You're pushing guys. At the same time, you're also loving on them too. And it's interesting to hear these guys kind of joke about just how tough Kirby Smart was on them. But at the same time, they also obviously knew that Smart valued his relationship with them. Once again, Super Bowl opening night, last night, Cody Chafin's on hand. Here are some former Dogs about to play in the big game, reflecting on the role that Kirby Smart played in getting them to this point.
Tell me about this guy. Tell me what he means to you.
Look, man, he's I wouldn't be here without him, man. I wouldn't be here without him. And, he's done a lot for us, still doing a lot for us, and we just grateful for him.
Hey, this guy right here, he's special, man. Listen, he'll care about you, and he'll hug you, and then he'll treat you like no other, man. I love this guy, and he come across to some people, as a yeller, but no, he's just a loud carer. I call him a loud carer.
A lot of bleeps around. So, Kirby Smart, one of the greatest coaches I've ever been around, man. He demands excellence, and he demands a standard no matter what it is, man. And just having a guy like that, you can never lack in any situation or any adversity that you go through, man. Just trust your preparation and just knowing that your standard is demanded in anything that you do, whether that's school, as a man, and out there on the field as well, man. So just having a person like that and just a model and icon around you like that could definitely help you be successful.
I just think that's great. Keely Ringo there, before that Nolan Smith, before that Jordan Davis. Keely calls him an icon. I think that's a cool thing to hear. But I love what Nolan Smith said. Hey, he said he's a very loud carer. He's not. People think of him as a yeller. I think of him as a very loud carer, which is a very funny way, kind of a sort of a very typical Nolan Smith way to kind of describe all of that. And one of the things that Cody was really good with last night is that he had all these props, and you can go to the DawgNation YouTube page or Instagram feed and see this. We'll do more of this throughout the week, but he sort of showed them that face of Kirby Smart. Hey, what comes to your mind when you think about all of this? And that's where Nolan kind of comes out. People think of him as a yeller. I think of him as sort of a loud carer. And it kind of reminds me of the package that Kaylee worked on from the Senior Bowl last week, where Smile Mon, I thought this was really funny. Mondon said that, Kirby would yell at him so bad the other coaches would come over and console Smile. Now Smile's a good football player. Smile's a guy who kind of does it right, and yet Kirby would still yell at him so much that the other coaches would come over and console him for, Kirby kind of getting off, after him so much. But at the same time, what a testament to Smart's coaching ability that these guys who were coached hard by Kirby, they were pushed, hard by Kirby, never doubted how much Kirby cared about them. Even Nolan Smith himself saying that, the loud carer. He never stopped caring about us, even as he was loud in coaching us. And I think that's what kind of coaching's supposed to be. And I do think that Kirby Smart has played a role in what we're seeing on Sunday. A lot of Dogs are going to be in the big game. And a lot of NFL teams have recognized Georgia and the role that it can play in developing players for that level. So in many ways, the Super Bowl will be a little bit of a commercial for Georgia football. It will be an event that extends the brand of Georgia football, because you really can't talk about Philadelphia without talking about the sheer number of former Georgia players on that defense. And this week will also kind of be fair and balanced and give a lot of attention to a guy like Malik Herring, too, who, by the way, his time at Georgia starts to feel like a little while ago now. He was one of the kind of the early days of Kirby Smart, but his presence in this game on Sunday, no less meaningful. It's a great time to be a Georgia Bulldog fan. The final football game of the year is going to have a pretty strong UGA presence, and fun on a Monday night to see Super Bowl week get off to such a great start. So many former Georgia players happy to talk about their time at UGA, and I thought absolutely tremendous coverage from DawgNation. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. So good to be with you all here today. Whether getting to us, video, of course, across all platforms, 10 a.m., seeing some of the images that we were just showing you there from New Orleans last night. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 96, The Rap Podcast, Apple, Spotify. Of course, we love our podcast listeners. So happy to have all of you with us, and so thankful to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. One of the things that I love about so many of our sponsors is that they're really dedicated to a specific kind of service that can kind of help step in and alleviate problems for you. And obviously, if you've seen, whether it be, a water pipe maybe burst, or your roof gets a leak into it, or, in some cases it could be weather-related type stuff, or unfortunately fire can happen as well. I mean, grease fire or electric fire, any kind of thing like that. That if you've dealt with that with some property that you own, it's the house that you live in, perhaps you have a rental property that you depend on for some passive income, you've got a warehouse that you've got a business that's housed in, any kind of damage to any of this property obviously really impacts your quality of life. And so you want it cleaned up, you want it restored to its previous condition. And that's not always an easy thing to do. And when you see it with your own eyes, sometimes that task can seem pretty daunting. But that's where our friends at ServPro can step in, because they are restoration specialists. They want to clean up and restore your property to get it looking like it never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. Whatever mess may have been, occur, whatever happened to cause the need for the cleanup, when ServPro's done, it'll look like it never even took place. It'll look like it never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. Each and every ServPro franchise also independently owned and operated. So reach out, let them do great work for you here right now. You can find them online. It's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com, S-E-R-V. Here's the truth. Right now, you may not need ServPro. You may not have a mess. If that's your situation, I'm glad for you. But I want you to always listen when I say stuff like this, because in the event some sort of disaster does strike and you do have some sort of water, pipeline, burst or fire breaks out, if you do see yourself in need of getting a mess cleaned up, then remember my message to you right now about those restoration specialists from ServPro. You can find them online at servpro.com. That's S-E-R-V, servpro.com. All right, we've got Jake Fromm here before we're done today. Connor Riley in just a couple of minutes prior to that. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about something. We just did some former Dogs there for a moment. Let's do some current Dogs here just for a little bit. ESPN, interesting story to ESPN.com. Their projections for way too early All-Americans. And what we saw is one Georgia player kind of made the list, and two more kind of got the sort of honorable mention type tab, if you want to sort of think of it that way. But, whether we kind of agree with that or not, I do think it sets the stage pretty well for who some of Georgia's most important players are going to be for this upcoming season. Let me start with the guy who made the team. It's punter Brett Thorson. We'll show you this here. Obviously recovering from a knee injury, but making his decision to return. ESPN pointing out that he was a Ray Guy finalist last year of the nation's top punter. He'll have a chance to win the award returning here for this upcoming season. And to be honest with you, my first reaction to this was, well, it's not really that exciting that, the only Georgia player mentioned as a projected All-American for ESPN in 2025 was the punter. You would kind of like to have a little, maybe, more exciting collection of positions mentioned here. The truth is, on further reflection, though, and we can bring that down now, is that if Georgia does have the best punter in America for 2025, as a Georgia fan, you'll be very glad that they do. You don't want Georgia to punt very much, but everybody punts eventually. And when you do punt, you want to be able to flip the field. Let's face it. Good defenses benefit when they're playing on a longer field. And when a good defense gets a stop on a longer field, what happens then? When the other team punts, usually that means the offense is working on a slightly shorter field. That if you could kind of whittle football down to a really simple thing, and if you could know kind of one basic stat about your team's game without knowing the final score or anything else, if you simply knew average starting field position for the opponent when it begins its drives, for your team when it starts its drives, average starting field position is a pretty good indicator of kind of how the game is going for you, and Brett Thorson obviously benefits from that. So I'm probably just like you, not all that excited about, ESPN likes the Georgia punter. That feels a little less, I guess, energizing than you'd like for it to be. But it could certainly be valuable to UGA if it does have the best punter in America. Let me, though, focus on a couple of the guys, though, that got kind of like runner-up consideration for ESPN. And this is where I think the proper framework exists for us to have a Georgia football conversation over the course of the next few weeks. Let me start with the tight end position, where a recent transfer to Ohio State gets the nod from ESPN. His name's Max Clare, coming to the Buckeyes from Purdue. But the guy who got the second team consideration here is Georgia's Oscar Delp. Now, if Delp really could be because when you look at this list from ESPN, what they're doing is they're looking at all 22 starting positions, 11 on offense, 11 on defense. They're basically saying, okay, here's our first team All-American, here's our second team All-American. And that's almost like the NFL does with its like not the Pro Bowl, but it's all pros. This is a pretty distinguished list. This is not like 57 guys getting, All-American consideration. This is like the top 2 guys at every position. And so if Delp is like second team All-American in ESPN's eyes before the season begins, along with Max Clare from Ohio State, what you're essentially saying is that Delp will have a chance to be the best tight end in America. And that's not just some sort of pipe dream or pulling something out of a hat, just sort of making something up whole cloth, given the fact that his predecessor at Georgia, Brock Bowers, won the Mackey Award as the nation's top tight end twice. Really probably should have won it a third time. One of the great miscarriages of justice of all time was the fact that he wasn't even a finalist in 2021. But nonetheless, Bowers did win the Mackey twice. And I'm not trying to say that Oscar Delp is Brock Bowers. That's not a fair thing to put on anybody. But when we saw the way that Oscar Delp was playing as the season progressed, I think I'm talking about in the most important moments of the season for Georgia late in the year, Oscar was playing a really good brand of football. And if he could pick up in 2025, playing the way that he did to conclude 2024, given the new shape that the Georgia offense is going to take, that could be really good for him individually. And he could be sort of an all-American style tight end. Or, as I mentioned, he could have a chance to win that Mackey Award and be honored as the nation's best tight end. In fact, with that in mind, let me let you hear me with Oscar going back a few weeks ago when we were in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl on the fact that Delp and many of the other tight ends too kind of seem to be playing their best football near the end of the season last year. This was an exchange I had with Oscar Delp about that.
First of all, it certainly seems like, and maybe your perspective is different, it seems like you've been playing excellent football sort of in the right time here during this stretch run of the year. 2 big catches, of course, in that overtime period against Texas. How have you kind of seen your season progress? And I guess how good does it feel to sort of see you and your tight end position group seemingly really kind of clicking what it looks to me like at the exact right time?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had good guys in that room, and we've always had a really good room, and stuff at the beginning of the year might not have gone the way it seemed for the fans and everyone, or not all the catches we wanted, but we practice hard every day, and you do it at practice, it comes to you in the game. So I think just making one play after another and just building that confidence and trust with your quarterback and coordinator, it's a lot. But I mean, we're out there doing things where people don't really notice just what we do, just because how versatile of a position we play.
Look, one of the reasons why I think that Delp's continued emergence could be really important for Georgia this season is because obviously Georgia's breaking in a new starting quarterback. We assume it's going to be Gunnar Stockton. Stockton and Delp seem to have a really good relationship. I guess they are roommates with each other there in Athens. And like the one thing the Georgia offense did not really have in 2024 is what I sort of like to think of as like the easy button. When times get tough, what's easy for you to get? What offensive play can you run? what offensive player can you lean on to kind of help make things a little easier. And when Brock Bowers was at Georgia, he was that. Think about 2023, on the road against Auburn, South Carolina that season too, where when Georgia kind of got itself into a tough spot, they could just go to Bowers over and over and over again. Once again, I'm not trying to tell you that I believe that Oscar Delp is going to be just like Brock Bowers. That's a lot to put on anybody. But if Delp could be the version of best tight end in America for 2025, and ESPN already has him as one of the 2 best right now, then that could be the easy thing that Gunnar Stockton knows that he can lean on. And if you've got an easy button you can push, then all the other stuff, trying to cultivate a better running game, trying to find a little bit more prolific passing attack with your wide receivers, focusing on that also gets a little easier too when you have the security blanket of knowing your tight end is going to be there for you and the guy that you can trust to give you a big conversion when you really have to have it. So it's not an empty thing that ESPN's projecting big stuff for Oscar Delp. He could be, I think, a pretty strong catalyst for the Georgia offense in 2025 if it works out that way. Another name that I'll mention here, another guy that kind of got that second team nod from ESPN, not the primary name mentioned, but the sort of second guy mentioned is at the linebacker spot, and that's C.J. Allen. I'll show you this on the screen here too. So Kyle Lewis from Pitt got the first team nod. C.J. Allen from Georgia got the second team nod. And once again, somewhat appropriate that Allen would make this list, because if we're thinking about a linebacker and you're only kind of putting 2 at each position, that means C.J. Allen would be in the conversation to be best linebacker in America in 2025. Well, of course, we know Georgia's been really good at cultivating that. 3 previous Bulldogs have won the Butkus Award as the nation's top linebacker. C.J. Allen could obviously be a guy that could do that in 2025. Let me tell you briefly why I think that Allen's presence on this is so important. Then after that, I'm going to bring on Connor Riley. Look, Georgia's got seemingly a lot of depth at the inside linebacker position, a lot less so at the outside linebacker edge rushing position because of the departure of Damon Wilson. So if C.J. Allen really does have his position kind of locked down, and if he really is on his way to being arguably the best linebacker in America at that spot, I do think that gives Georgia a little more freedom to kind of cross-train in sort of a Jalen Walker-style way. Some of those inside linebackers, maybe giving them a chance to play on the outside edge and cultivate their pass rushing skills a little bit. Some of those guys sort of had that look coming out of high school and doing more of that in college. I do think that's a possibility, especially if C.J. Allen is as good as ESPN predicts that he could be. So for now, all this is just sort of way too early projections. Maybe it doesn't bear a whole lot of resemblance to actual reality. But I do think the players mentioned, Allen on defense, Delp on offense, I do think that gives you a pretty strong indication of who some of Georgia's most important players are going to be in the season to come. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Now, we got so much to do. It is Jake Fromm coming up in just a little bit. Great stuff with him as a part of Kroger Fresh Take. Always glad to have him on the show. But for now, on ESPN's list, the Dogs in the Super Bowl, and everything else, let's cover all of that ground and more with Connor Riley here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Connor Riley, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Connor, we were just talking about the list at ESPN.com of Georgia players kind of getting all-American consideration. And obviously this is not necessarily the gospel truth or anything like that, but I do think it's a pretty interesting framework for a conversation because for reasons I just mentioned, starting with Oscar Delp, offensively, if Delp could really be like in the conversation of best tight end in America for 2025, which is what an ESPN projection like this would suggest the possibility, I just think that speaks volumes about what the Georgia offense could do this season as well, because they didn't really have anything easy a year ago. But if Delp is playing, even if it's not a Brock Bowers level, but just sort of the level of what the best tight end in America sort of typically looks like, even at that level, my gosh, all of a sudden, I think that Stockton's confidence, assuming he's the starting quarterback, it's got to grow by leaps and bounds. So as a Georgia fan, I'd love nothing more than for Delp to come close to suggesting or come close to matching what ESPN suggests as a possibility for him here right now.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a player on this Georgia team that had maybe a stranger 2024 season than Oscar Delp. Was essentially a non-factor the first 8-9 games of the season. I don't really know what to chalk that up to. I know David Pollack had said that there was a lack of trust between Carson Beck and Oscar Delp, but last 3 regular season games, Delp goes out there and catches 4 touchdowns. And then, yes, I know it's small sample theater, but in those games against Texas and those games against Notre Dame, I thought Delp did a good job of creating for himself when there wasn't necessarily a lot there. And sure, he didn't have statistically dominant games, but you saw a player that I think has taken a clear step forward. Something went on or something clicked with him late in this season. And I'd point out here, as the person that was telling everyone, hey, like Lawson Lucky's a pretty good tight end. And then he led Georgia's tight ends in receiving yards this season. It doesn't necessarily have to be Delp in this regard, but I do think that Georgia has the tight ends at their disposal to sort of, as you point out, use that easy button, just to find guys over the middle, make easy completions, because Delp and Lucky, I think as we saw at times during the 2024 season, are athletic enough and good enough players to create on their own. And they're not Brock Bowers. Nobody is. But they're still plenty capable players, and I think you saw that show up at times late in the season. I think especially when Gunnar Stockton stepped in as quarterback, and assuming here that he's going to be the guy going into 2025, if Georgia's going to use the middle of the field like they did when they were winning national championships in 2021 and 2022 and using Brock Bowers in that mold, I think Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky need to find spots and need to find space in the middle of the field as well moving forward.
The other guy that got second team mentioned was C.J. Allen on defense. What I said a moment ago was, man, it's not impossible to think that Georgia could have best linebacker in America because they've done that 3 times based on the Butkus Award in the Smart era alone. But if Allen really is that good, then to me it gives Georgia the luxury of taking some of the guys playing behind Allen, maybe seeing if they could be a Jalen Walker-style player and go play some on the outside edge too. Because right now Georgia's got more inside linebackers than it has outside linebackers. And some of those guys played some outside linebacker in high school. And so you kind of wonder, well, if Allen really does have that spot locked down that way, then why not experiment with some of these athletic dudes who maybe have a little bit longer frames and see, what do they look like coming off the outside edge the same way Jalen Walker did that to great success in kind of a hybrid role during his Georgia career.
I'm fascinated by what we're going to see out of C.J. Allen this year, because I think in comparison to those Butkus Award winners of the past, all 3 of those guys won the award in their junior season. Through their sophomore seasons, I think C.J. Allen is more developed than any of them. He has certainly played more big-time football than those 3 other players. Now, Roquan Smith was a top 50 prospect. Jalen Walker was a top 50 prospect. And Kobe Dean was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. And maybe some of the reason the hype around Allen isn't the same is because he wasn't viewed as this next great generational linebacker prospect. Raylan Wilson was a higher-ranked linebacker prospect in that 2023 recruiting class. And Troy Bowles, the son of Todd Bowles, draws a certain amount of attention there as well before transferring to Michigan. So I'm super interested in seeing what we see from C.J. Allen this year. In writing up the story, I was going back through some old quotes and notes that I had on Allen. I talked to him after the Notre Dame game, and I thought he had a fantastic quote. When you're a winner, you hate losing more than you like winning. And so I think that quote personifies maybe what this Georgia program wants to be about in 2025. And I think Allen, depending on what he does on the field, is the perfect leader to embody that off the field.
Do you think that Allen had a better second year than Roquan and Nakobe did? To me, I would say that maybe Roquan, Nakobe, I don't quite know. 2020 is also a lot harder to remember, it seems like. But how would you compare Allen's second year to the second year for Georgia's first 2 Butkus Award winners?
I think that CJ played on a better defense, and, given the fact that they lost Smile Munden for a considerable chunk of the season, forced him to take on, I think, an even bigger role. Whereas that 2016 defense that Roquan played on, it was just a very different time and place at Georgia. And so I give a little bit more credit to Allen and what he was able to do in that sophomore season than maybe what Roquan did in 2016, just because I think they were asked to do slightly different things. And Allen's task was a little bit harder, especially just given the schedule and the number of teams that Georgia played in this season.
I'm curious to your answer to this question. If you could pick another player in the Georgia roster that ESPN did not mention that you think could be in a discussion to be best player at his position for this upcoming season, who would be the next Georgia player that come to mind for you?
Do you want the safe answer or do you want the fun answer?
Give me the fun
I can give you both, too.
Yeah, give me both. But start with the fun answer.
The safe answer is KJ Bolden, 5-star safety. We've seen that before. I was really impressed by what we saw from him this year. I'm excited to see what he does going forward. I think with Georgia in a little bit better of a depth spot at the star and safety position, they're not going to ask KJ to do what they asked Malachi to do this season. And I think that's why Malachi maybe didn't have the impact that so many people thought. He's the safe and easy answer there. The fun answer to me is Nate Frazier. And we've talked about statistical benchmarks before and how they're not really all that important. But I look at this Georgia running back room and I look at this Georgia offense. Nate Frazier has to finish with 1,000 yards rushing this season, I think, if this Georgia offense is going to have the type of year that it needs to have to get not just into the playoff, but make a deep playoff run. Georgia hasn't had a running back finish with 1,000 yards in a season since the 2019 season with DeAndre Swift. And so I think that this is a guy who really showed that potential this season, playing under some of the same constraints that limited Trevor Etienne. I think Nate was a more impactful player when he touched the ball. You saw he had a good bit more juice, I think, than Trevor Etienne did. And Trevor Etienne is a very good player, in my opinion. So I think this season with Nate, if he's able to get the fumbling issue corralled, and that's the biggest issue with him is ball security at this point in time, if that no longer becomes an issue, I do believe that this is a guy that can have an All-American type season. Now, does he get that, opportunity? Because traditionally the running back position, it is one where statistics, I think, tell so much of it. I don't know, but I could very well see Nate Frazier being discussed as one of the best running backs in the country based on the talent and the lack of depth behind him that Georgia may need to lean on him in 2025.
One of the points we made a couple of times as it relates to Frazier is if you look at his first year on campus, and for whatever reason I like doing stuff like this, if you look at his first year on campus, he fares pretty favorably in a comparison with guys like DeAndre Swift, who would have been the last 1,000-yard rusher, and Sony Michel. Not the same freshman year that Todd Gurley had, not the same freshman year that Nick Chubb had. Those are guys that had better freshman years than Frazier, kind of suggesting what they would become as players. But I put Michelle in the category of, pretty close to all-time great, at Georgia. And I would have put DeAndre Swift, kind of near there too. These are top-shelf Georgia running backs. And Frazier in his first year for an offense that had kind of a hard time doing anything, his numbers were good enough to sort of be in the Michelle Swift comp range. To me, that suggests that what you're saying is not some improbable pipe dream. I do think that Frazier has the look of a guy that could be very fondly remembered by the time his tenure in Athens is done.
There's easy avenues, I think, for him to get better and him to have a better statistical season in that regard. He didn't play against Alabama. He had, I think, limited touches really in the first half of the season, the Clemson game aside. But you see the Florida game, he makes an impact there. The UMass game, his best game of the season, ran for over 100 yards. Even the Notre Dame game, I think in going back and thinking over that game again, yes, I think so much of that second half changed when it went from a 6-3 game to a 23 game by the time Georgia first touched the ball in the second half. But Frazier had 54 yards on 6 touches, and I think he's someone who, if that game doesn't spin out like it did, I think plays a bigger role in the second half there. So I think there are avenues for him to get better. I've been speaking with Josh Crawford prior to the Sugar Bowl. You hear him glowing about the impact and growth that Nate Frazier had as a pass blocker this season. And for him to get that and do that as a freshman, I think gives me a lot of confidence that he's got the mental aspect of this game down, and he's going to be able to make the improvements, not only as a running back, but as a pass catcher, and then obviously holding on to the football as well. If he's able to do that, I think that unlocks so much for him, and I think the rest of this Georgia offense as well.
I talked before you joined us, obviously good stuff from our colleague Cody Chavins in New Orleans last night for Super Bowl opening night. And to me, Connor, this story really is as good as it seems like it would be. A lot of what Philadelphia has done was on purpose. They wanted these Georgia players to be there. These guys who we enjoyed cheering for, those of us who are UGA fans, seem to be having the time of their life. I'm rooting for them hard on Sunday. I'd love to see them beat the Chiefs. I'm actually kind of excited about the game for that reason and others. I think the Chiefs' pursuit of history is pretty interesting, but the strong Georgia presence on Philly is really fun too. I think this is just a really, really cool experience, and I'm having a great time with it. You obviously are more into the NFL than I am. What do you make of all of this, and what it really is a very significant UJ presence in this year's Super Bowl once again?
It's very fun and exciting. And, you know, as someone who's gotten to know some of these guys, you know, I'm a big fan of Nolan Smith. Could not be happier for him to have the season that he's having for the Philadelphia Eagles, making the impact that he's having. Jordan Davis had a big sack in that conference championship win over the Washington Commanders. And it just speaks to, again, you know, if Philadelphia got a lot of flack last season when things went off the rails for them, and it was sort of, oh yeah, just taking all the players from Georgia, that's not such a great strategy. Well, a year later, when they're a team that essentially has lost one game since September 29th, and that was a game that Jalen Hurts, their quarterback, ended up getting hurt in, I think speaks to just how good that 2021 defense is, that it has so many of these contributors on it. And not only are they contributors, but they're making a big impact at that next level already. And so whether it's Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean, even special teams where Keely Ringo makes an impact there, as a Georgia, you know, partisan, it's super exciting to see these guys have this success. And as someone who wants to see the Chiefs lose because the inevitability of the Chiefs just seems to sort of bore me as a fan of football, I would love to see the Eagles knock off the Chiefs this weekend and prevent the Chiefs from winning a third straight Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the point you bring up is a good one. Like, I don't know the narrative on this as well as you do, but it seems like last year, not just the Philly Dogs part, but like the sort of Eagles situation overall kind of took a little bit of a dip, right? Where like the honeymoon was kind of over for a while, and for whatever reason and for whatever way, they've kind of resurrected that again. How come there has been such a, I guess, improved storyline around Philadelphia after what looked to be a little bit of a dip in 2023? I'm just not acquainted enough with the NFL to know.
Yeah, so the Eagles, they start, you know, year after the Super Bowl, it's always tough getting back. They start the year 10-1, but they slide down the stretch, get embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And maybe it's too simplistic, and I do think the rookie corners that they drafted, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, deserve a lot of credit. Obviously, Saquon Barkley playing at an MVP level at the running back position. But you look at this defensive front and what they've gotten out of Jalen Carter, what they've gotten out of Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, what they've seen from those guys. Nakobe Dean, prior to his injury, made a huge leap this season. The performance of the Georgia players in this defensive front seven, while it might not be the biggest, because I think that belongs to Saquon Barkley, might be a huge reason why the Eagles this time around are able to beat the Chiefs in a Super Bowl when they came up just short 2 years ago when they met in this game. And so I think that speaks to, one, the legendary status of that 2021 team that had so many talented players on it, but two, just what these guys have continued to develop in, and just I think what the Georgia program ultimately shows you, because it would have been easy after last year, you know, for Philly to continue to stumble again. But those that follow this Georgia program know the leadership ability of guys like Nakobe Dean, Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis. Not only are they great football players on the field, but they have the mental makeup to be great leaders off of it. And I think that's a big reason why this Philly team has been as dominant as they have been this season and have bounced back from what was a disappointing season last year.
I want to squeeze in one final thing before we let you go. You had a really good story at DawgNation.com looking at kind of a reconstructed Georgia offense for 2025, the trust that Georgia seems to have in Gunnar Stockton, let him sort of be that guy, but also the attempt through the transfer portal and obviously a robust signing class to upgrade the wide receiver position. What's your early read on how that's likely to go? And obviously, I would encourage folks to read your story there at DawgNation.com.
Yeah, so I think Kirby Smart knew that wide receiver was going to be an issue for Georgia this time last year. I think that's why Brian McClendon is no longer with the program. I think that's why they brought James Coley back. And you can say what you want about James Coley in his time as offensive coordinator at Georgia, the one season that he was there, but he is undeniably someone who upgrades the talent that you have, and they have gone out and done that at the wide receiver position thus far. I juxtapose that with the offensive line position, something we're looking at right now, and sort of wondering, okay, how does this unit improve going forward? Georgia doesn't play freshmen on the offensive line. The last freshman to start for this team was Cade Mays back in 2018. There also just aren't a lot of offensive linemen in the transfer portal that are capable of playing with Georgia. So Georgia's going to have to lean on what Stacey Searles has identified, developed, and recruited to sort of help elevate that offensive line. And I think injuries were a really big factor for this offensive line this past season as to why they had the dip that they had. But I think going into 2025, Georgia has so clearly seen the wide receiver position as, hey, we just need to get more talented here. And that's going to make a bigger position for us moving forward. On the offensive line, they're betting on themselves and what they've done of late. And I would note that Stacey Searles, for as poor as his unit was in 2024, had undeniably great units in 2022 and 2023. And so I think in that sense, Kirby is betting on the offensive line and the tradition that they have there. Whereas a wide receiver, it's so clearly, hey, we need to get better at this position and we need to do so fast, which is why James Coley was brought in to replace Brian McClellan at wide receiver.
It's a great story at DawgNation.com, and I think it's really terrific insight right there. Connor, we appreciate that. Hope you have a great day, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
Yep, as always, was a pleasure. Go Birds.
There you go.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
As they like to say, EAGLES, Eagles. I never thought I would be saying that, but I'll be cheering for them hard on Sunday. We're running a little late here, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give a shout-out to our friends at Royal Caribbean, and then we're going to bring on Jake Fromm and keep the fun guests going here today. And, of course, speaking of fun, so much of that in store for folks here in 2025 when it comes to Royal Caribbean. Obviously, we still love the brand new ships. Icon of the Seas debuted last January. Utopia of the Seas debuted last summer. And this summer, it's the debut of another brand new cruise ship. And if you love driving to Port Canaveral for your Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, you're going to love the fact that the newest in the Icon class of ships, Star of the Seas, is going to be sailing out of Port Canaveral. What a great experience this is. So many fun, great things happening with Royal Caribbean here right now, including all of us on board Utopia of the Seas for our DawgNation cruise starting April the 21st. So all of that is in store for you. So give our friend Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. You want to be on Utopia of the Seas? You want to be on Icon of the Seas? You want to be on Star of the Seas? Maybe a part of the inaugural sailing for that? Jessica Slater can tell you about all of that. Now, we've got some really good stories that we're going to do for cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, but I'm running a little late, which is not really anything very new. So in a moment, I'm going to look at some more of the SEC names that made the ESPN list of potential All-Americans. I think it's actually kind of an interesting year in the league based on this. And a former Georgia staffer has some good news. We'll celebrate that here coming up in a moment. But for now, let me bring the music down because I want to get to our next guest here in a Kroger Fresh Take as we get ready to say hello to the great former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, enjoying a little bit of off-season here right now. Jake, we're glad to have you as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take today. We appreciate your time. We hope that you're doing well.
Brennan, always glad to be here. Thank you for having me here on the show.
So we talked about Oscar Delp a little earlier, and obviously I'm not a quarterback, but I would presume – we're led to believe that Gunnar and Oscar have a pretty good relationship with each other. I guess they live together. Clearly Delp seemed to thrive with Gunnar at the quarterback position. And also just kind of coming on pretty strong late in the year, too. How important is it if you are a quarterback to kind of have that, probably an overused phrase, but the sort of security blanket of this is the guy that I know is going to be there. This is the guy that I know that I trust. And listen, we're going to try to do this. We're going to try to do that. But if it gets to be a tight spot, if it gets to be kind of a nervy situation, then I know number 4 is going to be there for me. As a quarterback yourself, how much do you like having that, I guess, that one constant that you sort of know that you can trust?
Yeah, I mean, when you kind of look at some of the evidence that these great offenses seem to have and the players that they have, man, a very talented tight end is something that keeps showing up over and over. You look at, what Kansas City is doing. You look at kind of what we did this year in Detroit with the Lions, Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, what Brock Bowers did during his tenure there at Georgia. Man, having a great tight end that you can count on in clutch situations just seems to be such a great enhancement for your offense. And having that relationship between Gunnar and Oscar, man, it's just only going to do great things for this offense. And if they can get clicking early, I think that they'll seem to have a lot of success. So it's going to be fun to kind of see how that relationship evolves over the course of the spring camp and stuff. But man, it's exciting, and hopefully it works out really well for him.
Because as a non-player, here's the one thing I've sort of always wondered. When you're going, you don't always huddle, but let's say that you did, you huddle and you got a play call. How much of that do you know is likely to go to this guy? I mean, sometimes Kirby will lead you to believe, we don't know where the ball's going to go. It's all dependent on what the defense does. And yet other coaches say, hey, it's players, not plays, that kind of, what an offensive game plan sort of built around. So when you're coming up to the line, if you're Gunnar Stockton, do you know, well, this is going to probably be an Oscar Delp play? How much of that really is going on, and how much of that really does get sort of dictated by whatever you happen to see once the ball is snapped?
Yeah, I mean, as much as sometimes the fans seem to believe, coaches are not idiots. There is intent to each individual play on basically kind of where they want this ball to go to. Now, to Kirby's defense, based on what the defense gives you, sometimes that intent can change. But there's always intent there, and you try to give your playmakers the ball as much as possible. So, man, that's definitely there, definitely at the forethought for these offensive coaches when they're putting together a game plan of which kind of people can we exploit on defense, which matchups do we like, and really hope that kind of that tight end matchup is something that would like to be exploited. So I always love tight ends because they seem to know the offense kind of as close or as much as a quarterback can, right? They see it from a different angle. They see it from a different lens because they get the passing game, they get the running game, and they're as close to a quarterback's friend as you get because they really see the game as much as a quarterback does.
So we're obviously in the offseason now. That means no football games are being played. We're also a few weeks ahead, month or so ahead of the start of, a little bit more than a month ahead of the start of Georgia spring practice. What's Gunnar Stockton doing right now? Like, what does his daily routine look like right now? Your best guess, anyway, in terms of how he manages his time without kind of official football duties taking place.
Yeah, I mean, it starts right now in winter workouts, and for him, it's trying to kind of develop himself as a leader, vocally, by example, and really trying to kind of develop this chemistry and this culture of what this football team is going to look like. Every team starts off from kind of base zero here in the offseason, trying to figure out, hey, man, who are the guys they're going to step up that we can count on over and over. And, I mean, for him, it's really kind of taking the helm, taking grasp of this football team and say, hey, guys, I'm going to be this guy this year, and I'm going to take full responsibility for that. And it starts right here and right now.
That's one of those things, too, that of all the responsibilities of being a quarterback, it seems like, just the best that I can tell, that's one of the things that kind of comes natural to him, right? It seems like he's okay kind of being in front of the room and sort of speaking to the team, maybe sometimes speaking on behalf of the team. The sort of intangible qualities of being a quarterback, it seems like that comes pretty natural to Gunnar.
Yeah, and 100%, and that's something that you have to do as a quarterback, man, being able to take own responsibility and to deflect praise, all the little things that people may look over goes into a huge part and a huge amount of a quarterback's success. And I think Gunnar does a phenomenal job of taking on all those kind of unspoken responsibilities that you take on as a quarterback, especially at a place as the University of Georgia.
I want to ask you about something that's not really related to Georgia, but as a quarterback, I'm curious your opinion. We've had people lately talking about some of the growing hype around Texas quarterback Arch Manning. This year is going to be his year. He's going to be the starting quarterback there. And the comparison been made to what it used to be around, say, Tim Tebow at Florida. The Manning camp seems to be kind of aware of this. They seem to have tried to, manage some of this the best that they possibly can. But there's also going to be, because of the famous last name, because Texas is a high-profile program, a really big spotlight on him this year. We also don't really know much about him as a quarterback because in real games, we haven't seen very much of him yet. Mm-hmm. What do you make about that whole picture? Like the fact that, Manning's about to be one of the most famous, guys in football, having never really played very much, and also trying to manage all that. Some of this attention really comes through no fault of his own. What do you make about kind of what does exist and what's about to exist around Arch Manning, probably the most high-profile player in the SEC for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed it. I mean, kind of what do we know about Arch? He's a phenomenal talent, got one of the best groups, camps kind of around him to help guide him through this. But we also know the expectations are out of this world. It just seems like anything short of a Heisman Trophy and a national championship would be considered a failure. So kind of from that standpoint, I'm almost kind of concerned for him. I definitely kind of on both sides. I envy him and I don't envy him, right? Yeah. Man, he's such a great player, great talent. But he's also has all the expectations that you could possibly imagine. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he personally kind of manages this and how his group and camp around him manages it as well. So, man, it's going to be a fun story to kind of watch and to follow throughout the year. But, man, big things are expected in Texas, and big things are expected from Arch.
I want to ask about the Super Bowl here in a moment before we let you go. Let me remind folks prior to that, it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. And speaking of our friends at Kroger, what a great thing they're doing for you right now. They want someone to win their way onto our DawgNation cruise. You and a guest have a chance to be there. You've got between now and I believe it's February 7th to register for your chance to win. All you got to do is go to DawgNation.com/contests. That's DawgNation.com/contests. And you can sign up for your chance to win on that. You simply need to tell us about your favorite moment from the 2024 season. There are a lot of them in an SEC championship year. Just tell us your favorite moment. You could be selected at random, and if you are the winner, you and a guest on your way. You get a hotel room in Port Canaveral on April 20th, the night before the cruise leaves. You will get a stateroom for two on board Utopia of the Seas. You'll get some onboard credit to enjoy while you're there. You're going to get a gas card to help you kind of get to Port Canaveral. It's a great giveaway. It's all courtesy of our friends at Kroger. So one more time, you have a little bit of time to do this. Jump in there, register for your chance to win, DawgNation.com/contests. Simply tell us your favorite moment from the 2024 season, and you could be in to win. And of course, always check out the great things at Kroger, including Kroger Boost, for a lot more on a great opportunity with all of that. All right, Jake, let's finish with this. First of all, I'll take a pick from you if you've got one for the Super Bowl on Sunday, but also as a quarterback. And listen, a lot of us are sort of sick of the Chiefs, and we're cheering for the Eagles because all the dogs are there in Philadelphia. But my gosh, what a career beginning for Patrick Mahomes. Not 30 years old yet. They've been in the AFC Championship game 7 years in a row, having a chance to be a three-peat here in the Super Bowl, something that's never been done. As a quarterback yourself, how much do you appreciate just the remarkable success where, like, already Mahomes is in the conversation for, among the greatest quarterbacks of all time? How much do you appreciate his greatness? And if you don't mind, some thoughts on how you think the game may play out on Sunday, too.
Yeah, what the Chiefs are doing right now is nothing short of historical. I mean, they're just a good football team, top to bottom. Got a great coach in Andy Reid. Obviously a great quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, and I think they have one of the more underrated defenses throughout the entire NFL, and just the way they just keep finding a way to win, especially at the level that the NFL is at. It is tough to do week in and week out. So I wouldn't bet against the Chiefs. Obviously, kind of secretly maybe rooting for all my fellow dogs there in Philly, but it's going to be tough to beat the Chiefs. They just find a way to win these one-score games, and they have a knack for winning. They got great coaches, and when it comes down to these big-time games at the end of the game, man, Pat just finds a way to get it done.
It's really amazing. Jake, we always appreciate your time. Such great insight on everything involving Georgia. Thank you so much for that. Enjoy the week. We'll look forward to talking to you soon as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily.
Thank you, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, and we'll try to get the train back on the tracks here a little bit. We'll go back to some of our cruise around the SEC through stories. We don't need any music for this or anything like that. But one of the things that we had mentioned a little earlier was, ESPN puts out kind of a way too early preseason All-American list, and we looked at, Brett Thorson kind of making that as a first team, C.J. Allen, Oscar Delp getting consideration for that as a second team. I wanted to mention a couple of the other SEC names that kind of showed up on this list. I'll also say this. So Clemson's got the first team quarterback in Cade Klubnik and two first team defensive guys too, T.J. Parker, Peter Woods there on the defensive line. So if it really is true that you've got best quarterback in the country and two of the best defensive linemen in the country, then Clemson's like all the way back as a not just ACC title contender and a playoff contender, but perhaps even more than that. It does seem somewhat interesting to me, though, that Georgia, who beat Clemson by 31 points last year, here we are, less than a year later, already we think that, at least ESPN does, that Clemson has more top-end talent than Georgia does. I may be a little suspicious of that, but I don't necessarily fault the claim on the individual players because I like them too. Ryan Williams, no surprise, he gets mentioned here for Alabama. Obviously, there was all the chatter a few weeks ago about, the desire to keep him, and there were rumors it might be going here, going there, whatever Alabama needed to do from a financial standpoint. They seem to have stepped up. They've got Ryan Williams, Ryan Grubb coming in as offensive coordinator. Obviously, big expectations for Williams here this year. Jake Slaughter got mentioned by Florida as the top center. One of the things that has been kind of a secret issue for Florida a lot in recent years, and one of the reasons why that program has struggled so much, they've been pretty bad along the offensive line. Obviously, for DJ Lagway in kind of a second year at the program, expecting to kind of take big strides, he'll need a good offensive line in order to be able to do that. So interesting that a Florida lineman's getting some love. Another SEC lineman gets mentioned here, Caden Green from Missouri. Do with that what you will. On the defense, LT Overton for Alabama. It is a season in which Alabama is going to kind of have to be back in the college football playoff for Kalen DeBoer to kind of make good on what's required of him as a replacement for Nick Saban. And, of course, to have one of the best defensive linemen in America would certainly be a recipe for kind of how you get back. I would say that was one of the things about Alabama this year that sort of felt very non-Nick Saban-like. The Alabama defensive line in the 2023 SEC championship game really kind of terrorized Georgia. Really kind of, I thought that was the biggest factor in the game overall. Seeing them get back to that would be very important for Alabama's chance of contending here in 2025. No surprise that Dylan Stewart from South Carolina gets mentioned. Look, here's the one thing I think you notice about South Carolina. Whether it be Lenora Sellers at quarterback or Dylan Stewart along the edge rushing spot there, Gamecock's going to have two of the best players in the entire SEC. You can make a case that Sellers very easily could be the best offensive player. Stewart may already be the best defensive player in the SEC. And this offseason, at least at this point, you haven't heard one peep about, and you've heard this plenty. Somebody try to swoop in and take Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State, swooping in and taking Ryan Williams from Alabama. You really haven't heard any of that around these high-level players at South Carolina, a place that just based on reputation, you might not think the Gamecocks would necessarily have the power to keep other programs from poaching their talent. But thus far, if you listen, there are no rumors about either Stewart or Sellers going anywhere. Shane Beamer just got a big contract extension. Seems like for now, South Carolina looks like they're trying to build something here. Anthony Hill got mentioned from Texas. That's the linebacker. Jermod McCoy from cornerback from Tennessee got mentioned. So decent presence of SEC names on this preseason All-American list there from ESPN. I'll also mention one more thing here. Congratulations go out to Scott Cochran, the obviously longtime strength and conditioning coach at Alabama that left that role to come to Georgia to be special teams coach. And, of course, he's been very open about the battle that he fought with addiction and is fighting with addiction that obviously took him away from his on-field role at Georgia. And Scott Cochran kind of got out of the public eye for a while, completely focusing on that recovery battle. Certainly we celebrate all the great strides that he's taken there. Now he's back in coaching again, named this week as the head coach at West Alabama. Listen, you talk to a lot of people who were with Cochran in Alabama for a long time, those former players. They really rave about him. They really, really loved him. And they, I think, got the sense that he really, really loved them too. So the people who've been around Cochran will say nothing but great things about him. Obviously, this is a very happy ending to what's been kind of a long journey for him, but now back in coaching, head coach at West Alabama. So good news there for Scott Cochran. We're really happy about all of that. We'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Daytona Beach here too. You want a fun beach getaway, great time to do that with our friends at Daytona Beach. About 23 miles of shoreline. International Airport gets you there. great golf and fishing and surfing, so many awesome outdoor activities, and a great time to get some great savings on a wonderful resort or hotel to stay at, too. If you go to DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals, you can find out more about that. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. Obviously, the big race coming up very soon, but it doesn't have to be motorsports related to bring you to Daytona Beach. It's a gorgeous beach, fun place. I grew up going there. And it's a great time to kind of reacquaint yourself with Daytona Beach and see all the cool things like the Ponce Inlet Lighthouse and all the other great stuff. All there for you at Daytona Beach. So check out DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. One of the things we like doing around here is our Gator Hater Updater. Not the only countdown, though, some Georgia fans enjoy, or I guess just sort of number counter in general. We'll give a golden shoe in honor of that today. Georgia on tap, writing in to say, here's some interesting data for you, DawgNation Daily. This is as of the other day. It had been 9,197 days since Georgia had lost to Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Obviously, this year's game taking place in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, but maybe the city limits will still be good to UGA. Dominating Tech in Atlanta. Be nice to see Georgia get a convincing win against these Yellow Jackets later on this year. So good stuff from Georgia on tap. And by the way, we're talking to Jake Fromm about Arch Manning a little earlier. I think one of the things we may do coming up, as I've been saying this, we're going to give you a way to kind of remember just the success that Georgia had against Arch and those wins. In honor of sort of countdowns, remembering things and stuff like that, we're going to do some of that here coming up pretty soon. Also, $1 Million Eddie wants me to make you aware when it comes to our Gator Hater Updater. This is the number we love giving you. Been a long time since Florida's beaten Georgia. How about a nice even number for you today? 1,550 days. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Over here at DawgNation.com, Porter shouting out those lousy, stinking Gators. Porter, I like that. Good stuff there. MG mentioning Clemson. Listen, they may be very good in 2025. Perhaps they will be. But that is a lot of love, even in comparison to Georgia, for a team that Georgia just throttled, kind of in keeping with the spirit of, do we remember what Georgia actually did this year? Clearly lost a couple of games. We don't dispute that. But a team in the playoff that won a Power 4 league, Clemson, Georgia absolutely throttled them. Absolutely throttled them. Seems like we should probably remember that. Henry Dion mentioning Kirby playing freshman offensive line. Hard to do that. You probably haven't had a freshman start since Andrew Thomas. Am I right about that? Now, guys like Cade Mays and others were playing some as freshmen. You've had several guys that have kind of rotated as a freshman. But the true on full starter, has that happened since Andrew Thomas? Maybe my memory is failing. Yeah, Kaylee didn't want the Cade Mays mentioned. But so they've had some freshmen that have played some. But have they had a full-scale freshman starter since Thomas? I don't quite remember that. Stick D is wondering about Puglisi competing for the starting job. I mean, listen, I think what you want from Puglisi is, I think a more realistic expectation for him is, does he develop in such a way where maybe at some point in time in the season, Georgia would be okay putting him into the game? Now, as it stands right now, whether they're okay or not, they probably would need to put him in the game if Gunnar were to get injured or something were to happen. But I think barring that, I don't know that yet Georgia views Ryan Puglisi as game ready. So if it's a battle between Puglisi and Stockton for the starting quarterback job, Stockton is a massive favorite. It is not obviously Puglisi is going to get his looks at this, but you have to understand that Gunnar Stockton is a massive favorite. That doesn't mean that Ryan Puglisi might not eventually go on to be a better quarterback than Stockton currently is, but Stockton is well ahead of him right now. So I think what you would like to be true is to develop Puglisi over the season to the point where, second half of the year, late season, much the same way that Gunnar got called on late season this year, if Puglisi, because of injury, is called on next year, that he might be ready for that. And perhaps even more important than that, the possibility that Puglisi could be a future starting quarterback for Georgia, developed to the point that you feel okay one day giving the reins to him and not having to go out there and get a transfer quarterback or something like that. That if you could develop Puglisi in-house, you'd obviously be very happy to do that. So that's the real story here. I know that there's some media types that are going to try to make it out to be the competition, and obviously at Georgia there's always going to be competition, but there's also kind of a sort of understanding that competition means two guys standing on somewhat equal footing, and I don't believe right now, with all due respect, no matter how talented Puglisi might be, given Gunner's experience, I don't really believe that Puglisi and Gunner are standing on necessarily equal footing, at least right now. Let's see what else. DMart42 mentioning that Puglisi also has some athleticism to him, and he does. The ability to kind of move around, keep plays alive. I mean, anything that you see from Puglisi from video or something like that, and keep in mind, we did not see him at G-Day a year ago. We expect that we will see him this year. Everything about Puglisi just sort of looks like a quarterback. It just sort of I've said before that if you're casting a quarterback in a movie, Puglisi would be a good figure to kind of cast in that movie because he's very, very believable as a quarterback. But the one thing you can't really see is the value of experience. Experience doesn't show up just to the look. Stockton has some of that now, and that's a huge edge in that competition. Gary Roach, we talked about C.J. Allen earlier today. Gary predicting that C.J. will be the next Buckus Award winner for Georgia, which you certainly love that. Jerry Dog Fan says the team seems to like Gunner Stockton. That means a lot. I would agree on both fronts. I believe they do like Gunner, and I also agree that there is some value in that. Look, players just know. They just know. When it comes to like a relationship with the media, it's fairly easy to fool the media. I mean, I said this earlier. All of the sort of like, aw shucks, can you believe where we are type stuff, like that works on me. And if you wanted to fake that, if you wanted to like sort of pretend to be a good guy when you speak to the media, or even if you wanted to kind of fake it with the fans, we hear this with like celebrities sometimes. They're like, oh, they may look nice on TV, but in real life they're horrible to their staff, or they're cruel. That the real life version of them is not what the projected image is. If you want to fool media and fans, you probably can. But it's going to be hard to fool the guys in your locker room. So when a Georgia player supports another Georgia player, I take some real value in that. I take some real meaning in that, especially when it's guys rallying around a quarterback. Because they just know things we don't know. They just sort of see the more real, the more genuine, the more unvarnished version of what's actually going on. And so the fact that the Georgia players who've kind of seen the sort of unprotected version of Gunner Stockton, the version of Gunner Stockton that just sort of is who he is, the fact that they like that guy means something to me. Matthew Goodwin says, when is G-Day? I believe it's Master Saturday this year. So whatever date that is, mid-April. I believe that's, Easter's the 20th. And so that'll put what? G-Day's the Saturday before that. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says Kirby likes his quarterback season. That's for darn sure. Yeah, there was a time not all that long ago, Jake Fromm, an example of this, where we had a lot of freshman quarterbacks playing in college football for a while. Fromm starting at Georgia as a freshman. Tua stepped in for Alabama in the national championship game as a freshman. Trevor Lawrence was starting at at Clemson as a freshman. Jacob Eason started at Georgia as a freshman. We had a lot of freshman quarterbacks playing a lot. You had guys like Jameis and Manziel, 2013, 2012. They were, I forget they were redshirt freshmen or not, but they were like, sort of first-year starting quarterbacks. A lot of young guys were playing for a while. We don't do as much of that anymore. Arch Manning's going on year 3. Hasn't really played very much. much. Nico Imaloleva did not play very much in year one. Even like the most heralded recruits, if Florida had had its way, I believe it would have not played DJ Lagway this year as much as it did. For whatever reason, last few years, the trend of playing very young quarterbacks kind of ended, and it's become a veteran quarterback's game. It really has. Kirk Schultz says the experience is always the best teacher. Pugs will get his shot eventually. Gunner's been thrown in the fire already. That experience from this past season will show up in the upcoming season. I really do think so. A little bit of experience goes a long way. It just changed. It just does. It's like there's just a huge transformation that comes from that. I think that's probably true. Doesn't guarantee you'll be great, but it gives you a big leg up in the competition. April 12th. Thank y'all very much. Appreciate that. Let's see what else. Kent Holcomb reflecting on some of his favorite beach towns. Listen, we love the beach kind of no matter what. Let's see what else. A lot of folks are having a good time. You always appreciate good stuff in here. William Camacho on the subject of like Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole like MVP conversation is kind of interesting right now. Like I do like paying attention to those odds and stuff like that. And, you kind of wonder, I mean, it's like, we looking at like a 2-touchdown day from Barkley. It seems like, I guess what Mahomes has won the last 2 Super Bowl MVPs for the Chiefs, right? Quarterback oftentimes does. This sort of seems like one of those years because of how Philadelphia is built, because maybe on the Kansas City side they're looking to sort of get somebody else some love. Like you kind of wonder, is this one of those years where we're destined to have a non-quarterback win Super Bowl MVP? And obviously the odds get pretty interesting if you start thinking about a non-quarterback winning it. Or, are you better off looking at, as opposed to like sort of predicting somebody to be the MVP, if you like, some of the fantasy type stuff or whatever else, like looking at an individual player having a really big day. In other words, if you think Philly can win, are you essentially betting big on a big day from Saquon Barkley? Does he have to have 2 touchdowns for Philly to win? If you like Barkley to have 2 touchdowns, you can certainly do something with that information. And if you don't think either Hurts or Mahomes is going to win MVP, you can also do something with that too. So I do love the Super Bowl. I do love like Super Bowl MVP talk and all that kind of stuff. I kind of get into that. Good to see Celicia Gagnon checking in today. Celicia, we're glad you're here. Gail Bonner's got it 27-24 Eagles. I mean, we have seen a handful of defensive players win Super Bowl MVP. Like Larry Brown won it for the Cowboys back in the 90s. Seen it happen a few times. Like one of these Philly guys, I mean, if Nolan or Jalen gets like 2 sacks, at the right time, that could be in a game where you have a lot of different stuff going on, perhaps not super high scoring. If the right former Georgia player gets a couple of sacks, I mean, we've seen defensive players win it before. Perhaps you would see that, especially given the fact that, Philly, I mean, like Philly's just not thought to be, other than obviously Saquon Barkley, one of these like really dynamic offensive teams necessarily. Spencer Clark says that Saquon Barkley, kind of a classic throwback type of running back. Yeah, a little bit different for this league now to sort of see. I mean, obviously when I was a kid, many teams had a running back as sort of the face of the organization. We don't do that as much anymore, but Barkley is certainly that for Philly right now. Foster Moss says that Jalen Hurts is barely getting 200 passing yards. Yeah, I mean, I've never been all that impressed with him as a quarterback. Jerry Dog fan asking about who that second running back for Georgia is going to be. As of right now, we don't know. I would say that Branson Robinson is going to have a real shot at it. It seems like he's on his way back from injury. Where is Roderick Robinson in his injury recovery? We're not quite so sure. Does Georgia go out and get a portal running back? We're not quite so sure about that either. And then, guys like Chauncey Bowens or Bo Walker, they're going to be heard from too. But, I believe that Nate Frazier is going to get a lot of carries for Georgia this year. Connor Riley said earlier he thinks he needs to be a 1,000-yard rusher. I would tend to agree with that. But there is still room for at least one more back to be involved in the Georgia offense. Obviously, Cash Jones returns too, but you sort of see Cash as more of like a pass catcher than a traditional running back maybe, really vying to be that second running back at UGA. Very important conversation, and we don't have all the information on that yet. G. Gray says that BA is jealous. G. Grace, why would I be jealous of a former Oklahoma quarterback? Only time Georgia's played Oklahoma in recent years, they won. So I don't have any reason to be jealous of a former Sooner. Let's see what else. Henry Dion calling for a national championship in 2025. I love that. Chef Jake Bowen says, I'm just not that into the NFL like I am college football. I just don't have time to keep up with it. I do like watching the playoffs. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I try to follow the league a little bit throughout the year. When I have time to watch some of the games on Sunday, I find it a little bit relaxing because, I'm like you. I put so much of my life into college football. It's kind of nice to have this other version of football where I'm a lot more just sort of casually involved. Sometimes that feels good. Do enjoy the playoffs. And, frankly, when you've got what you have on Sunday, team like Kansas City really kind of going after a tremendous historic feat. Like, you can't downplay what 3 straight Super Bowls would be, but in the eyes of many of us, sort of a fan-favorite team stepping in the way to start them, that feels like pretty good TV. I think that on average, I'm more interested in this Super Bowl than sort of the average NFL fan is right now. You get the impression that some fans, I'm talking about hardcore plugged-in sports fans, are sort of tired of the Chiefs. They feel like they've seen Chiefs-Eagles before. They're kind of not all that. In fact, this week, if you kind of pay attention to the national sports media, way more Luka talk. And I know that's a big trade, but thus far, it's Tuesday morning as we speak right now. There's been way more Luka talk than there's been Super Bowl talk. I think that gives you an idea that, in the eyes of some, this Super Bowl is a little played out. But because of the Philly-Georgia connection, and as just sort of a dork, I have appreciation for history, I think I'm a little bit more into this game, this matchup, than some football fans are. Craig Wade said, when it comes to pro sports, it's all about the business and making money. You can certainly, we said this yesterday when it comes to like stories like Dan Jackson. Like, if you want to focus in on all of the ways in which college football is becoming more like the NFL and totally a business and all about the money, there's no shortage of evidence that sort of proves that to be the case. But if you also want to make sure you notice the stories like Dan Jackson, there's still enough of that where college football kind of feels like the special thing that it's been to us in the past. And we simply have a choice to make of, like, which of these stories are we going to notice? Are we going to notice the stories that confirms our priors about, like, the overly sort of business, like the business culture around college football now? Or are we going to focus in on the stories that have always meant something to us about the individual, players like Jackson and the incredible stories about how they kind of got to the spot they are? You can sort of choose what you pay attention to. I would say in professional sports, the same kind of thing is true. That if you want to kind of only focus in on sort of the cold, callous, calculated version of this, obvious business, you could spend your whole life just looking at stuff like that, and everything that you looked at and noticed would be true. But you could also look at the other stuff too, because I would say there's clearly an aspect of some of the Georgia players we highlighted in New Orleans from last night who seem to be having a really good time, and the business part of football is sort of the farthest thing from my mind. It kind of reminds me of the great line from the old movie North Dallas 40 of the player saying, every time, I call it a game, you call it a business, and every time you call it I call it a business, you call it a game. I mean, it can sort of be a game or a business, sort of depending on which perspective you're looking at it. And I guess try to seeing it from all sides. Maybe that makes some sense. Henry also mentioned Chauncey Bowens. Well, I think that Chauncey Bowens is a part of the conversation. Once again, I would say experience matters, and if Branson Robinson or Roderick Robinson is healthy, they'd probably have the leg up on Bowens for being that second running back. But I do believe that Chauncey Bowens is going to get a shot, and we probably will see a lot of him during spring practice, or on G-Day in particular, All right, let's do one more trip around the comment section. DawgNation.com here for a moment. Randy Hogg, complimentary of the black shirt today. I appreciate that. I like wearing black, partially because I can just sort of scoop it up off the floor and it doesn't look too wrinkled. I was going to wear a red shirt today, but the red certainly showcases a lot more in the way of wrinkles. So I had to go to the black shirt instead. And that, unfortunately, is a true story. Let's see what else. Garrison Tucker says, what home game this season does Georgia have the highest chance of losing? Well, they're all going to be pretty, of the main ones, they're all going to be pretty tough. Obviously, just the basic odds would tell you that Texas is the most likely because on paper, Texas will be the best team. But as we said on one of our shows earlier this week, boy, the one streak, and we'll probably do something on the show about this coming up pretty soon, in addition to what we've already said. The one streak that Georgia still has intact, they kind of lost their winning streak. They've lost their national championship streaks. Like some of the streaks that Georgia has had have kind of gone by the wayside here. They lost their non-conference winning streak. But the one streak they still have is the long home winning streak. Won every home game in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. 5 years worth of undefeated at home. If Georgia could go undefeated at home again, given the slate they're about to play, that could really go a long way towards, boosting Georgia's chances for being back in the national championship picture. Boy, what a big year this would be to keep that home winning streak intact. I think we're going to do more on that at a certain point. Let's see what else. HS Dog says his favorite goal line play is always the tight, heavy formation, fake the handoff for the running back, the tight end releases after blocking. Yeah, as HS is mentioning, that's one of those things where that's one of the reasons why a tight end is so valuable, because when you have the extra body, attached to the line of scrimmage, obviously you got to respect that from a running game standpoint. But when that guy releases, all of a sudden now, it just completely changed the way you defend it. It's one of the reasons why you see a lot of NFL teams that go kind of like 22 personnel, like 2 tight ends, 2 running backs in the game. The sort of look that screams running, just, conventional wisdom, maybe sort of simple view of that would be, that's a formation to run out of. But a lot of the NFL coaches, Bill Belichick was famous for this. They love to throw out of the big sets, the heavy formations with a couple of tight ends, a couple of running backs in the game. Feeling like you could create a mismatch against the defense by forcing them to consider run and then looking to throw out of that. That's a sort of a sharp kind of game within the game type thing. Eugene Marine says cannot lose to Texas. He says he's living there in Houston. Oh, he said no, with Matt living there in Houston and him in Dallas-Fort Worth, that would be a mental beating. Yeah. To all of our dogs out there in the Lone Star State, we don't want you to have to suffer through that. As we said before, eventually we're going to try to do something to kind of help all these Georgia fans remind people that, oh, yeah, by the way, Georgia had a lot of success against Texas here this year. Jim and Sharon Caldwell checking in from Yorktown to say go Dogs. That's really cool. Glad to have you all here. That's awesome. Greg Baker checking in to say, how's the weather in North Georgia? Been back in Nicaragua for 3 weeks and been totally checked out. Well, Greg, we're glad you're here today, and obviously happy to have you checking in from such a long way away. This week, I'm happy to report, after what's been a miserable winter in Georgia, weather's beautiful this week, so we're trying to take full advantage of all of that. So I'm glad that you're with us here today. Greg, it's great to see you on the show today. That's awesome. Chef Jay Bowen wants to see Stetson Bennett get a statue. I'm totally in favor of that. In fact, that may be a good place to sort of leave our conversation for today. I think that'd be an awesome thing. Stet definitely deserves it. Maybe one of these days he'll get it. I'd love to see Georgia kind of have that sort of Monument Park type thing, the way in which a lot of like Major League Baseball teams do. There are clearly some great careers worthy of being honored. Maybe one of these days we'll see that happen at UGA. For now, though, y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. The RS stands for Rapid Service. That means if you have a plumbing emergency or anything like that, R.S. Andrews can show up and get you fixed up right away. Water heater goes out. In many cases, they can replace it for you the same day. So please find them online, rsandrews.com. Hope all of you have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.